that today. What everyone has been saying for years and years and years in defense of those people who Donald Trump was calling murderers and rapists. Everything we've been saying, I guess, has finally sunk in with Donald Trump, the slowest and stupidest president in history.
So after years of calling them rapists, criminals, and not the best, Trump finally admits immigrants are useful, just good labor. But while he's busy promising to deport 13 million people, someone should probably remind him he married one. And when Lawrence O'Donnell held up that mirror on national TV, Melania didn't just lose it. She saw the whole house of cards start to shake. Satire, real quotes, no apologies, and that's just the beginning, because what comes next hits even closer to home.
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it, and it's a very tough thing to do.
That means roughly 13 million immigrants who entered the country illegally are at risk of deportation, about 4%.
The camera lights hit the MSNBC studio just as Lawrence O'Donnell leaned forward in his chair, the kind of posture that told viewers he wasn't about to play nice tonight. His voice, calm but loaded with that razor-edged sarcasm he'd perfected over decades, cut through the air. If Donald Trump really believes in deporting migrants, he said, pausing for effect, perhaps he should start with his own family. The clip began to spread before the segment even ended. Producers backstage could see the numbers climbing in real time. The retweets, the shares, the quotes, each one laced with either gleeful applause or furious rage. The words were simple, but the impact was devastating by the time the broadcast wrapped. The political internet was already on fire. What Lawrence had done was take a long whispered hypocrisy and broadcast it in front of millions. Melania Trump, the former First Lady, came to the U.S. from Slovenia, and her parents followed under a program that Trump himself had spent years denouncing: chain migration. He had called it, warning his followers that it was a dangerous loophole. But the loophole, O'Donnell pointed out, seemed to fit like a glove when it benefited him personally. Inside Mar-a-Lago, the reaction was instant and volcanic. Sources close to the Trumps say Melania didn't even wait for the clip to finish, playing before she turned to her aides, furious. Her voice, usually controlled and deliberate, was sharp, almost trembling with anger. "This is disgusting," she snapped. "How dare he attack my family?" But the aides knew this was no ordinary TV jab. It was the kind of viral moment that could spiral into days, maybe weeks, of headlines. Donald Trump, for his part, reportedly fumed in private before taking to his phone. Within minutes, his Truth Social account was lit up with a caps rant. "Fake news. Lawrence O'Donnell is a lowlife who hates America. Melania is the most wonderful First Lady in history." The post was followed by another, then another, each angrier than the last. But if he thought shouting into the digital void would end it, he was wrong. Cable news picked up the story immediately. CNN ran it as a top-of-hour segment. Fox News hosts tried to deflect, shifting the focus to immigration crime statistics. But even some of their analysts quietly admitted O'Donnell had landed a hit. Social media accounts compiled side-by-side clips of Trump railing against chain migration, next to footage of Melania's parents taking the oath of citizenship. The contrast was impossible to ignore. By midday, hashtags like #Deport Your Migrant Family and
years. At that pace, Trump would need 3 terms, 2 miracles, and a time machine just to hit his goal. And that's assuming 20% of people leave voluntarily, which, knowing Trump's brand of hospitality, feels optimistic.
Tent-style courtrooms in Laredo, Texas, cost about $16 million to build and $143 million annually to operate. Once a person receives a final removal order, they have to either report for deportation at a later date or wait in detention until then.
At that point, the U.S. government has to actually arrange the removal. That would involve putting them on a bus and sending them to Mexico, but if they're from any other country other than Canada, that means putting them on a plane and flying them to their ultimate destination.
Because nothing says limited government like tent courtrooms, bus convoys, and taxpayer-funded deportation flights to 190 countries. At this point, it's less a policy and more a travel agency for mass removal, run by the same guy who couldn't repeal Obamacare after promising it for a decade. And don't forget, this is just year 1 of a plan that hasn't even been written down. So that's the plan. A decade-long budget-busting logistics nightmare of a promise sold with a straight face and a red hat. 13 million deportations, but no blueprint. Hundreds of billions spent, but no accountability. And after all that, guess who finally realized it wasn't going to work?
You know, they have very good workers. They've worked for them for 20 years. They're not citizens, but they've turned out to be, great. And we're going to have to do something about that. We can't take farmers and take all their people and send them back because they don't have.
Hashtag Lawrence got him were trending. Political comedians had a field day. On The Late Show, Stephen Colbert opened his monologue with a faux Trump impression. I've always said, no chain migration, unless it's a gold chain, worn by my father-in-law straight out of Slovenia. The audience roared. Even Saturday, Nightlife writers were reportedly rewriting sketches to include the jab. Behind the scenes, Republican strategists groaned. They'd spent months trying to keep immigration as a winning wedge issue for their base, but this story risked turning it into a punchline. It feeds into every accusation of hypocrisy we've ever tried to dodge. One GOP consultant admitted to Politico. And the worst part, it's true. Melania, meanwhile, wasn't sitting quietly. Those close to her say she began calling trusted contacts in the media, pressing them to defend her and reframe the narrative. Some conservative pundits obliged, calling the attack sexist and unfair to families of immigrants who follow the law. But the damage was done. The internet wasn't letting go. On TikTok, political influencers stitched O'Donnell's clip into satirical videos, juxtaposing it with clips of Trump promising to end chain migration. On Instagram, meme accounts posted images of Melania holding a sign that read, "Don't deport me, bro." It was ruthless, and it was everywhere. Trump's advisors debated how to handle the fallout. One faction urged him to ignore it and move on. Another pushed for an all-out counterattack against O'Donnell, MSNBC, and the failing fake news media. Trump, predictably, sided with the latter. He began working the insult into his rally speeches. There's this guy, Lawrence O'Donnell, third-rate television host. Failing show, nobody watches it, and he says terrible things about my beautiful wife. His crowd booed on cue, but outside the MAGA bubble, the headlines were unrelenting. Michelle Obama was even asked about the controversy during a podcast appearance. While she didn't name names, her comments about leaders who preach one thing and live another were widely interpreted as a subtweet aimed at the Trumps. The clip racked up millions of views in hours. By the end of the week, the O'Donnell moment had evolved from a one-night cable hit into a cultural reference point. Pundits.
Donald Trump completely surrendered on his promise to deport 15 million people. The central lie of Donald Trump's deportation campaign promise came apart today.
So there it is. The mass deportation lie, the chant, the threat, the promise. Gone. Not because of compassion, not because of conscience, but because even Trump finally realized it was never real to begin with. And when the salesman admits the product doesn't work, even the diehards start looking for a refund.
Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that anymore. The stupidest man in the room finally realizes the Democrats are completely right about this and always have been.
After years of lies, raids, and red hats, it ends like this. No wall, no plan, no apology. Just the man who built a movement on fear, standing alone, agreeing with the people he swore to fight. And not because he grew wiser, but because even he couldn't sell the lie anymore. And speaking of immigration, maybe it's time to talk about the one person Trump forgot to deport, the one who shares his last name. Funny, for a man obsessed with deportation, he's always known exactly who to keep close.
Your husband has a long history of opposing immigration, both legal and illegal. Yet he hires immigrants to work at his hotels, and he's married to immigrants.
Well, you know what they say. Immigrants, we do the jobs Americans don't want.
So while Trump was shouting about bad hombres and building walls, he was also building something else, a life, with an immigrant. She wasn't just part of the system. She used every inch of it and brought her parents along too. Because when your slogan is America First, but your marriage certificate says Slovenia, something doesn't quite match.
Did you know that after Donald Trump and Melania
Both
met?
sides used it as shorthand for political hypocrisy. Immigration activists used it to highlight the double standards in policy enforcement. Late night, comedians milked it for every laugh possible, and in the middle of it all, Melania was said to be growing increasingly isolated. Friends noted that she canceled a scheduled charity appearance, citing family matters. Insiders whispered that she'd urged Donald to take legal action, though most agreed there was no realistic path for a lawsuit. The First Amendment, as it turns out, is a tricky thing to litigate against when you're the subject of public debate. Still, the controversy reignited questions about Melania's role in Trump's political ambitions. Was she a reluctant participant being dragged back into the circus? Or was she quietly preparing to re-enter the spotlight on her own terms? Those who knew her best said she despised public humiliation more than anything else, and O'Donnell's remark had struck directly at that nerve. For Lawrence O'Donnell, the moment was career gold. His ratings jumped, his social media following surged, and his name trended alongside the Trumps for days. When asked in an interview whether he'd gone too far, O'Donnell simply smiled. "I told the truth," he said. "If the truth stings, that's not my fault." The story didn't fade quickly. Weeks later, the phrase "Deport Your Migrant Family" was still showing up on protest signs, political merch, and online discourse. For Trump, it was another reminder that in politics, sometimes the simplest attack line, just a few words long, can do more damage than a 1,000-page report. And for Melania, it was a lesson she already knew. In the world of American politics, personal history is never off limits, and the internet never forgets.
Typically wait longer than longer for visas. Okay, so Melania gets the expedited path based on an Einstein visa after meeting Donald Trump at the Kit Kat Club. Then she brings in her family, and now Donald Trump's against all of those same policies.
So let's get this straight. Melania meets Trump at a nightclub, gets a genius-level visa, fast-tracks her citizenship, then uses chain migration to bring her parents to the US legally, swiftly, and quietly. And the man who made chain migration sound like an invasion, he's the reason they're all here. Turns out,